Headlines touted him as the master of disaster back in 2011 when then Vermont Governor Peter Shumlin appointed Neil Lenderville the state's recovery officer for Tropical Storm Irene. He talked to our Kathleen Zoni about how this latest flooding compares to that catastrophe.
So let's talk about that blast from the past, Tropical Storm Irene. What differences and similarities are you noticing between the recent flooding and Irene?
Neighbors are helping neighbors, communities are coming out, and the state is pulling together. And I know that Vermont will rebuild smarter and stronger. So there's one similarity right there. When disaster strikes Vermont, no matter what it is, Vermonters come together in this Vermont strong way. And we're seeing that in this July 23 flooding in spades all across Vermont. And it's so heartwarming to be able to see. But there are some differences in this. The storms themselves are different. Tropical Storm Irene was just that, a tropical storm. It came in fast and furious. It hit a lot of small mountain valleys with very strong river waters. Now, we had some flash flooding here. This storm over the last couple weeks ago was really a slow cooker. It built over time, it dropped a lot of rain, but that did allow waters to come up more slowly. As a result, the damage patterns are a little bit different. Irene knocked out a lot of bridges, culverts, roadways. We saw some of that this time, but we're seeing a lot more property damage in downtown Montpelier and all the little downtowns across Vermont. So those are a couple of things that are same and different. I will say that after Irene, I think we did build back better. We lost far fewer roads, bridges, and culverts this time around, despite seeing as much rain as we saw in Irene. So there's a success story right out of the gate. The recovery in any case is going to be a sprawling enterprise, and it's not going to take a day or two or a week or two. It's going to take many months, and for the folks who are affected, it's going to take years. So there will be time enough to get all of the parts together and really be able to come back stronger than ever.
What were some of the lessons during the recovery from Irene that we learned, things that could have been done better maybe after Irene, that might have informed the state's response this time around to this storm?
There was a lot learned from Irene, but there's also been a lot learned more recently with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we saw very effective communication from the governor all the way down through state and local officials to make sure that people knew what was coming with the storm to get out of harm's way, and now an even better job communicating what resources are available for families, businesses, and communities to get help. That was something that we were putting together on the fly during Tropical Storm Irene, because we hadn't experienced that kind of massive flood event in many years. Now, we've got the lesson learned, we're doing it better this time, and I think that will ultimately lead to a stronger recovery down the line.
How long should people really realistically be bracing for here?
Well, it sort of depends on how you were affected, but I'll answer this in two ways. If you're affected, this could take a long time. I mean, we've heard that the last bridge that was impacted by Irene was just fixed last year, which is sort of unbelievable, to more than a decade. But for your average home, it's going to take many months to just sort out what to do next. But a lot of folks who lost everything, it's going to take them years to try to rebuild their life. And there's no amount of money, there's no amount of all we can do to help them do that. It'll be a process of change and growth and working through that trauma. What I will say to everyone who is unaffected, this is an important lesson learned from Irene, that we cannot forget about the communities that were affected. Now, in a couple weeks, there'll be other things that enter the news, and the storm coverage might go down. But those folks who are still dealing with this are going to be dealing with it for a long time. So the rest of Vermont, who's coming out so bravely and valiantly right now to help their neighbors, we need to continue that focus for many months. We cannot let our neighbors in need lose hope. That's a really important lesson from Irene.
Well, given that we've had two devastating storms in the last 12 years, should we be kind of reconsidering how and where we rebuild at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, these storms, these once in 100-year storms are happening once every 10 years, once every year. I mean, this is the impact of climate change that we're feeling here in Vermont. The frequency and the intensity of these storms is changing, and we have to be planning for the future to make sure that we are not putting our communities and our families in harm's way again. We know that in Irene, there were over 1,400 homes significantly impacted by Irene. More than 400 of those were mobile homes. Now, a lot of mobile home parks have been really impacted here during this flooding. We need to think twice before before we rebuild in those same areas. And those are challenging. Folks want to get back in their homes. They want to start their lives again. So collectively as Vermont, we have to think about how we can provide these homeowners who might be in floodplains, who are going to get risk of being flooded again next year or the year after, find them something different. Now's a good time to do it when we have this attention, and I certainly hope we can, because we don't want to year after year expose them to the dangers of the flooding that's coming more often.
Neil Lenderville, thank you so much.
Thanks for being.